Shalom everyone, hope all is well. Zat Hashem, we're continuing on today in Masechet Sanhedrin with Vav Amud Aleph, 6a. We're going to begin at Gufa, which is the third line on the page. Zat Hashem, our learning today should be a source of zechut, of merit, for Refuah Shleima for Yaakov ben Dinah. And today's Amud, Vav Amud Aleph, is going to have two sections. The first section is going to be a continuum of the Machloket Amoraim we left off yesterday of Shmuel and Rabbi Avahu. We'll discuss that, bring challenges. And then the second section we'll get more into towards the bottom of the page will be a discussion about this idea of pshara. How many judges are necessary for compromise or arbitration? And that will really lead us to tomorrow's discussion, which will be on Vav Amud Bet, Bezat Hashem. So before we start, let's just remember where we left off yesterday. So we left off yesterday with a machloket amoraim between Shmuel and Rabbi Avahu. Shmuel was of the opinion that there is a position in the Tanaim, the Rabbanan, who hold that if you had less than 3 people judging a case, means judging a monetary case, say loans, the halacha would be that the outcome is binding, meaning you can have a court case that is adjudicated even with 2 people, as we said yesterday. It's called Beit Din Chatzuf. It's an insolent court, but it's effective. That was at least in the position of the Rabbanan. Rabbi Avahu said everybody agrees such a court case would not be binding, that's not effective, because you need 3 judges in order to judge monetary cases. So we're going to pick up now and challenge this position of Rabbi Avahu, who says monetary cases are not allowed to be adjudicated with less than 3 judges. Gufa, says the Gemara, we're quoting what we had mentioned yesterday, Rabbi Avahu. Rabbi Avahu says, Shnaim shedanu dine mamonot, if 2 people judge the case of monetary law, ledivre hakol ein dinei and din. So like we said yesterday, although there is debate, and we'll get to at the end of the day today, regarding pshara, regarding arbitration compromises, that maybe you can have less than 3 for compromises, but you cannot have less than 3 for regular court cases, and therefore, if 2 people judge the monetary case, Rabbi Avahu said everyone will agree it's not an effective outcome. It's entirely reversed. The psak is not binding. Asks the Gemara, Kashan Rabbi Avahu, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Bechorot, and the Mishnah says as follows. Rabbi Abba challenged Rabbi Avahu from the Mishnah in Bechorot, and it says as follows. The Mishnah says, Dan et hadin. If one judge, and Rashi says we're not talking about a mumcha, we're not talking about a judge with smicha, we're talking about a hedyot, an ordinary person who judges a case. Vizika et hachayav et hazakai, and he makes a mistake, and he makes innocent or validates the one who's really chayav, who's responsible, who's liable, or he makes liable the one that's innocent, meaning he gives one person money that the other person really deserved, so he paskined wrong, or timeh taor tiheret tameh, or he contaminated, he said something is tameh which was really tahor, or vice versa. And as Rashi adds in, the Gemara later is going to tell us, not only did he do that, but he did some sort of a physical action in order to illustrate the psak or to carry out the psak. For example, he paskined that they came to one person, he paskined that Reuven owed Shimon money, and he took the money from Reuven and gave it to Shimon. Or in the case of Tuman Ta'ara, he paskin this meat is tameh, and he put it amongst tameh things to illustrate that it was tameh. So he did some sort of physical action to carry out the psak that he had determined. So the Mishnah there says, Ma she'asa asoi, the psak that he has set forth is done, it's accepted, but since he made a mistake, restitution needs to be made. U'mishalem mi beito, he has to pay from his house. Now let's just speak out. What does that mean? It means the court case is not overturned. His psak is upheld. And therefore, if Shimon is holding on to money that's not really coming to him, he could turn to this judge and say, you said I could keep this money, I'm allowed to keep this money. I don't have to give the money back to Reuven. He paskined wrong. Okay, so he caused damage to Reuven in paskening wrong, and therefore he'll have to pay back, the judge who made a mistake will have to pay back Reuven for the damage that he caused him. But what do you see? This is a lone judge. This is a single judge. And yet, it seems that the case is upheld. Because if it was completely not binding, so that it should be entirely undone, we're not saying it's entirely undone. It's upheld, and the judge has to make restitution for his damage. But what you see is, because he made a mistake, what you see is an individual person paskening in a court case, it is effective. There's a kash on Rabbi Avahu. The Gemara answers, no, Rabbi Avahu says, really in a normal case of regular monetary discussions, for example, you would need 3 judges. But hacha b'mayaskin, and what is this Mishnah talking about? Dekibluhu alayhu. What happened was, the 2 litigants, let's say in the case of money, they approached an individual, and they said, we want you to adjudicate our case. Now Rabbi Avahu would agree, even though for it to be a proper court case, you usually need 3, but if 2 litigants approach an individual and say, we want you to adjudicate our case, he could adjudicate the case as far as they're concerned. If they say they want one person to do it, this person is allowed to do it. That's perfectly acceptable. So the Gemara says that's why it would be binding, because they accepted this guy as their judge in the first place. But in a normal case of monetary cases, certainly you need 3. Says the Gemara, but that doesn't make sense. If they accepted him as their judge, so then why does he have responsibility because of an error that he made after the fact? He should be exempt. He should be exonerated from this. Ihachi, the Gemara says, if that's true, why will he be responsible to make restitution for the mistake that he made? Once they accept him to be their judge as an individual, he should be exempt. So the Gemara says, because these 2 litigants can say to him, Dayanta lan din Torah, did you judge for us din Torah? Meaning, did you paskin in accordance with Torah? You made a mistake. We accepted you as the judge under the circumstances that you would paskin in accordance with din Torah, in the right way. You made a mistake, so now, since you made a mistake, you're responsible to make restitution. But the bottom line is, it comes out that there's a gray area here. In regards to undoing the entire psak, no. Rabbi Avahu says, in the end of the day, if they accepted him as their judge, so therefore his psak is binding, and therefore the litigant who had received money in the wrong way actually doesn't have to pay back. He could say, look, you paskined in my favor, and that's something we accepted. But regarding the damaged party over here, end of the day, this judge made a mistake, and now he'll have to make restitution to that damaged party. And therefore, he has to pay back mi beito. He has to pay back from his house to restore the money to the person who had to pay it, because it was the inappropriate thing for him to have to pay. Okay. So Amar le Rav Safra le Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Safra returned to Rabbi Abba and he said, I don't really understand now how you're explaining the Mishnah. What mistake did this fellow make? This judge that they had accepted as a lone judge. Dita b'mai. What was the mistake that he made? Ilema, if you'll say the ta'abidvar Mishnah, he made a mistake regarding a explicit Mishnah. Means there's an explicit Mishnah. The halacha is clear, and he made a mistake regarding that. So in such a case, it's binding, but he has to make restitution like a mazik, like a damager. The problem is that can't be, because v'ha'amar of Sheshet, Amar Rabbi Ami, or Amar of Asi, the halacha is ta'abidvar Mishnah. If a judge makes a mistake in the psak, in something that's explicit in a Mishnah, choser, the entire case is overturned. Meaning we say is, if he made a mistake in something that's obvious and it's written mefurash, clearly in a Mishnah, it's not binding and then he just has to make restitution. The entire case is undone because he made a mistake in something that's a mefurash Mishnah. So that can't be what he made a mistake in, because then he shouldn't be responsible to make restitution. Ella, so the Gemara says, rather, what was the mistake that he made? He made a mistake in something that's not explicit in a Mishnah, but rather something that is contingent on shikul adat. What is shikul adat? It means calculation of the mind. Something that requires logical deduction. This isn't what he made a mistake. So, what is the example of shikul adat? Means, what is an example where he makes a mistake in some sort of a logical conclusion, and it'll be binding, but he'll have to make restitution because of the mistake that he made. So Amar of Papa says, Kegon trei Tanai, meaning like this, where there is a machloket of 2 Tanaim, there's some sort of a debate between Tanaim, the trei Amorai, or 2 Amoraim. So there's some debate between the rabbis in a certain halacha. They argue with each other. Velo itmar hilchata lo kemar velo kemar. But it doesn't state explicitly in the Gemara, in the Sfarim, it doesn't state explicitly who the halacha follows, which of the two sides. However, v'sugyan da'alma li b'dechad minayu. The general consensus in the world amongst judges is like one of the parties. So meaning the generally accepted belief is like one of the two Tanaim, or like one of the two Amoraim. V'azal ihu. So this judge went in this court case, and he followed v'avad ki'idach, like the other of the Tanaim, or the other of the Amoraim. So hainu shikul hadat. This is the definition of shikul hadat. So in such a scenario, it emerges like this. Rabbi Avahu would say, again, generally to judge monetary cases, you need 3. If the litigants accept upon themselves, we want one person to judge us, that's fine. But the only thing is, he has to judge al pi Torah. Now, if he makes a mistake in a Mishnah that's clear, that's explicit, well, then the entire thing is undone. So what's that Mishnah talking about? He made a mistake in regards to something requires logical conclusion. So what does that mean? It means there's some machloket in between Tanaim or Amoraim. The general consensus amongst judges is like one side. He went and paskin like the other side. So that's considered a mistake. The litigant who received the money, which was inappropriate, but he received it, he could say, you made a psak based on one of the Tanaim or Amoraim, I could retain my money now. But the other litigant, whose money had been taken from him inappropriately, he could say, you made a mistake. Because the general consensus is not in the view that you said to us. And therefore, the case is binding, but the judge now has to make restitution to the hurt party, to the one who he damaged, by causing him to pay inappropriately. That's the outcome of this. So therefore, we've resolved Rabbi Avahu. It's not a contradiction. And let's continue on now. Now, what the Gemara is about to do is to say, perhaps, this machloket Amoraim, Shmuel and Rabbi Avahu, is actually a machloket Tanaim. Now the Gemara does this sometimes, where we have some sort of an Amoraic debate, which is a later generation. Amoraim were after the Tanaim. Tanaim are generally the people listed in Mishnayot and Braitaot, and Amoraim are the people listed in the Gemara, later generation. So what the Gemara is going to do is to say, we know we have this machloket Amoraim, but as we're going to try to illustrate from a Tanaic source, really there's a reflection of this in a machloket Tanaim. Now in general, the Gemara does not like when this happens. And the reason is because if there's an earlier debate amongst the Tanaim, why would later Amoraim argue about this again as if it's a new debate? They could just say, I follow the earlier Tana X. The other one could say, I follow the earlier Tana Y. The fact that they're arguing later as if it's their own debate implies there's no machloket earlier. So the Gemara says, let's see if this is a machloket Tanaim, we'll refute that it's not necessarily the same debate. Lema ketanai. So let's suggest this machloket, Shmuel and Rabbi Avahu, is actually contingent on an earlier debate. Now just let's get clear again. What is this machloket, Shmuel and Rabbi Avahu? Shmuel is of the opinion that a court case judged by less than 3 people, let's say 2 people, is considered a binding reality. It's considered a binding outcome. The outcome, even though it's considered beitin chatzuf, it's insolent, it's inappropriate, but it is nonetheless binding. Rabbi Avahu said, no, nobody holds that way. None of the Tanaim hold that way. There's no machloket regarding that. Everyone agrees that if you judge with less than 3 people, it's not effective. Says the Gemara, alema ketanai. So let's suggest that this is actually reflective in an earlier machloket. The Braita says as follows. Bitzua, Rashi learns bitzua is a pshara. It's very interesting. Bitzua is a compromise. Bitzua, to be botseya, is to break bread. It's actually the language we use. Habotseya, someone that breaks the bread. You break it in half. So a compromise, I guess, is the usage of, it's not going to be actually the meted out halacha as it should be, but rather some sort of a compromise. Everybody gets part. I guess that's the idea. Bitzua, when it comes to pshara, Rashi says, compromise, bishlosha. It requires 3 judges in order to create a pshara, a compromise, like we spoke about before. Divrei Rabbi Meir. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Chachamim omrim, but the Chachamim say, pshara b'yachid. No, pshara, this creating a compromise, is not a regular court case, but rather compromise. You could even do it with a singular judge, with 1 judge. End of the Braita. Now, what does this have to do with judging with less than 3? So the Gemara says Savrua, in order to assume that there's such a debate that reflects Rabbi Avahu and Shmuel's argument, the Chachamim in the Beit Midrash thought L'kulei alma, that everybody agrees, means both Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim agree, makshinan pshara ledin. We're going to learn on Amud Bet, there's a pasuk that compares pshara, which is again, the ability to arbiter, create compromise in court, ledin, to regular court cases. It's based on a pasuk in Shmuel Bet, Rashi quotes it here, it says mishpat utstaka. Mishpat is regular court cases, and staka, charity, it refers to creating pshara, creating compromises. So everybody agrees that there is a hekish, a comparison in the verses between regular court cases and pshara and compromises, arbitration. So my love b'hakamiflagi. So then what is the point of debate? Demar savar, that Rabbi Meir is of the opinion, din bishlosha, that usual court cases can only be accomplished with 3 judges. And since there's a hekish between regular court cases and arbitration and compromise, pshara, or we're calling in the pasuk tzedakah, so therefore just as regular court cases requires 3 judges, also you need 3 judges for compromise. So Rabbi Meir would then come out like the Tana Rabbi Meir would reflect the position in the Amoraim of Rabbi Avahu that a court case done with less than 3 is not effective. Umar Savar, and the Chachamim in this Braita would hold Din Mishnayim, that you could even have a court case done with 2 people, meaning to say that just as a court case could be done with less than 3, let's say 2 for now, so too, because of the hekish, a compromise can also be accomplished with less than 3, as they say in the Braita. Chachamim say it could even be done with 1. So therefore it would come out, the machloket Tanaim, like Shmuel, actually Chachamim would come out like Shmuel, would reflect the machloket Amoraim. Now like I said before, generally the Gemara does not wish to go with this approach. Even though it sounds nice, you could package it nicely this way. The issue is, why would the Amoraim argue anew as if it's their machloket if it was already discussed before? They should have just said, then it should have just been like this. Shmuel says, I paskin like the Chachamim, and Rabbi Avahu should have said, I paskin like Rabbi Meir. But they don't reference those earlier debates. So it must be that it's actually not a machloket Tanaim, and they both side with one of the Amoraim. So the Gemara therefore says, no. Tikule alma din bishlosha. Really, it could be that everybody agrees, both Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim concede with Rabbi Avahu, that din bishlosha, generally court cases require 3 judges. V'hacha v'hakamiflagi. So what is the point of debate regarding arbitration, compromise in this Braita? Demar savar, that Rabbi Meir holds, makshinam pshara ledin, like we said before, that we compare through the pasuk, pshara, compromise, to din. Just as din, regular court cases require a court of 3 judges, also compromise requires a court of 3 judges. Umar Savar, the Chachamim hold, lo makshinam pshara ledin. We don't necessarily agree with that hakish, with that comparison, and therefore, although din requires 3, like Rabbi Avahu had told us, when it comes to pshara, you don't need 3, you can get away with just 1. Beautiful. But what emerges now is we've introduced, as we move on now to the second section, regarding this pshara, and this will take us till tomorrow also, God willing, that there's 2 types of scenarios that you can have in terms of resolving some sort of a conflict or some sort of a debate, a monetary issue. You can have something called din. Now, din means that you go to the front of the judges and they tell you this is, after deliberation, etc., this is the halacha, or you could have pshara. Now, pshara, it's not exactly going to be what the halacha is, but pshara is going to be some sort of a compromise, okay? You'll get this, you'll get that, and hopefully everybody goes home happy. And we'll actually discuss tomorrow if this is considered something appropriate or not. But what would emerge, the Gemara is about to suggest, is it appears that there are actually 3 shitot in the Tanaim, 3 opinions in the Tanaim regarding how many people are necessary to create an arbitration, a compromise. We had the position of Rabbi Meir, as we said in the Braita just now, you need 3. We have the position of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that we learned yesterday in the Tosefta, who said that you actually can get away with 2. Remember the Tosefta at the bottom of Hamud Bet. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said the difference between pshara and din, of compromise and regular court cases, is that pshara could have 2. And now we have in this Braita, we have the Chachamim who say you could have one. So it seems to be 3 shitot in the Tanaim regarding the number of judges required for arbitration. So Lema, the Gemara says, let us suggest, Tzlatzat Tanai b'pshara. There's 3 positions in the Tanaim regarding arbitration. Demar Savar Rabbi Meir in this last Braita holds Bishlosha. You need 3 judges for arbitration. Omar Savar, Shmuel ben Gamliel quoted yesterday, Bishnayim. It's sufficient for compromise to have 2 judges. Umar Savar, but the Chachamim in this last Braita hold, B'yachid, it's enough to even have just 1. So the Gemara says, it's not necessarily 3 opinions. As we're about to show, really the Chachamim, Shifman ben Gamliel, could be 1 opinion. Amar Avahu Breid Ravika v'item Rabbi Yemer bar Shalmaya, Man de Amar, the one who says, which is Shifman ben Gamliel, Trey, that you need 2, Afilu Chad Nami. Really, he would hold, you don't need 3. The point is you don't need 3 judges for arbitration. That's the chumrah of judgment over arbitration, over compromise. That judgment requires 3 judges, and arbitration you don't need 3, which means you could even get away with 1. So really, Reb Shimon Gamliel would concede to the Chachamim here. So why does he say 2 then? V'haidika Amar Trey, the reason he says 2, sahadi, in order that there is testimony about it. Meaning, he's giving good advice, saying like this, regarding this type of outcome, which is arbitration or compromise, what you would want is that the litigants who come in front of the arbiter have some sort of a testimony against them or for them in terms of the agreement that they had agreed upon initially, as this is not a normal case of judgment where you'll have 3 judges, and therefore, in order to confirm that, and as a testament to the future, it's a good idea to have 2 people there who can act as edim, as witnesses. So he's saying, really to arbitrate, to create a compromise, you only need 1. But in order that there could be people who testify, i.e. these 2 judges, later, because you need 2 people in general for testimony in the Torah, in order that there's a testimony as to the fact that they agreed to a system of arbitration, of compromise, and what the conditions of that will be at the end, it's a good idea to have 2 judges there, because 2 judges, 2 people can act as witnesses, as edim, that this is what occurred and this was the outcome. So that's all Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is saying. He's not necessarily disagreeing, though. 1 would also be binding for compromise. 2 is just a good idea, so there's testimony for the reality and outcome of this arbitration. Okay. Continues the Gemara in this discussion about compromise. Amar Rav Ashi. Now, let me just speak this out. Rav Ashi is about to say, and we'll see it inside. Rav Ashi says like this. Rav Ashi really addresses a point that we haven't yet discussed. When we talk about arbitration, compromise, one could say, and really Tosafot gets into this in a minute, that, okay, so they came in front of 1 person, or 2 people, or 3 people for that matter, for some sort of arbitration, right? For some sort of a compromise. The Beit Din said, this is what the judge that was taking care of this compromise scenario, this is what I think is the accurate conclusion in terms of, I would suggest, in terms of a compromise. Now, there is discussion if compromise, such a thing, is only binding when there's actually a physical kinyan that's made, a physical acquisition. Generally in halakha, to have some sort of a binding reality, there has to be a kinyan, some sort of a physical reality. Very often what we'll do is a kinyan sudar, which is somebody will pick up a kerchief, which is symbolically effective in terms of creating a kinyan. So what Rav Ashi is going to say is, although one would suggest, in order for this to be halachically binding, there should be some sort of a physical action, a kinyan, the fact that Rabbi Meir says, and there's a shita of Rabbi Meir, you need 3 judges to have a case of arbitration effective, it must be you don't need a kinyan. Why? Why is that true? Because he says like this, if you did indeed need a kinyan, you shouldn't need 3 judges. It should be sufficient to have 2 judges, and then you make some sort of a physical kinyan at the end. That would be enough. But Rabbi Meir says you need 3 judges for arbitration. Why is he saying 3? Because it must be you don't need a kinyan, some sort of a physical acquisition to conclude arbitration, or Tosafot goes through it. He's not clear if the beginning of arbitration you would make this kinyan or after, but either way, the fact that you need 3, according to Rabbi Meir, shows it's because you don't need a kinyan. Because if you did need a kinyan, 2 would be sufficient. Kinyan would make it binding. Ella, it must be you need 3 to give it the significance of a court, so that the arbitration is upheld, because otherwise you wouldn't have a kinyan anyways, and that would be not binding. So So the Gemara says like this, Amar Rav Ashi, Shmami, no, we could deduce from a mayor's position that you need 3 judges, Pshara einat tzeicha kinyan. And when it comes to compromise, this type of a conclusive outcome, you don't need some sort of a kinyan. Because if it entered your mind, tzricha kinyan, that you do need a kinyan in order to create a reality that the arbitration is upheld, lemanda amar tzrichat lata lamali. Why would Rabbi Meir say you need 3 judges? Tiski betray, it should be sufficient to have 2 for arbitration, and do a kinyan at the end. Meaning, as Rashi explains here, essentially what the judges are saying is, this is what we decided based on compromise, and you're giving a gift to him. That's what we essentially decided. And it would be sufficient to have 2 judges, some sort of a kinyan to lock it in, make it effective, and that's enough. Must be, you don't do a kinyan. And since you're not doing a kinyan, you need the koach of a beit din of 3 people. That's why Rabbi Meir says you have 3. So v'haraya, you don't need a kinyan when it comes to arbitration. But the Gemara says it's not true. This is not the psak. V'hilchita, Paskins, the Gemara, the halacha is pshara tzricha kinyan. Actually, pshara, when it comes to compromises, you do need a formal transactional kinyan, some sort of a physical action of kinyan. And Rashi says, even according to Rabbi Meir. So even according to Rabbi Meir, that you have a court of 3 in order to enact and to adjudicate compromises, you still need a kinyan of sorts. And again, Tosafot goes through, is that kinyan done before or after? I've heard that some places in Din Torah today, when they do arbitration, they sign a document at the beginning of it. Maybe that's like a kinyan, I'm not exactly sure. But the point is, the Gemara's paskening, there does have to be some physical kinyan in order to lock in the outcome of a arbitration. Let's finish up here. Tan Rabbanan, the Braita teaches us as follows. Kishem shadin bishlosha, just as court cases require, regular court cases, 3 judges, kach bitzua bishlosha. Compromises, pshara, also requires 3 judges. So the Gemara paskins like Rabbi Meir, you need 3, like really, paskins like Rabbi Avahu in terms of just as court cases require 3, also bitzua, also like Rabbi Meir, the psak is that compromise requires 3 judges to adjudicate. Turning to Vav Mud Bet, Nigmar Hadin, but once the case has been concluded, the judges are not allowed to create a compromise anymore. Now Rashi says something a little bit confusing. I'll tell you how Tosafot explains it. What is Nigmar Hadin? So Rashi learns when the case has been concluded, She'amru ish ploni ata zakai ish ploni ata chayav, means that the judges who judged a certain case, and this was a regular court case, not an arbitration, they've already told the 2 litigants, you are chayav and you are zakai. It means you owe him money and you are owed money. Once they've already meted out their judgment, they're not allowed then to make a compromise after. So the Rishonim speak out against Rashi. They don't say, I don't understand. Once they've meted out judgment, of course they can't, meaning it's already finished. And also, of course they can't make a compromise. No one's going to want to listen to them. Meaning once this guy knows that he's owed money, he's not going to agree to a compromise. So what's Rashi saying exactly? So Tosafot explains Rashi, though Rashi means, but he says bedochak, it's a little bit difficult. Bedochak yesh lomar, it's Tosafot nigmar din at the end of the Tosafot. He says, it's a little bit difficult, but you could say, Shelo yat'u oto lomar lo yireim anu shema ta'inu bedin. Maybe what they could say is like this. You would have thought that even though they were meting out judgment, they would say like this. Maybe you would have thought that they could do this. They could say to the one who is owed the money or owing the money, this is what we concluded. You're innocent and you're guilty, but we might be making a mistake, so we would encourage you to have a compromise. That's what the Gemara is saying you're not allowed to do. Now the other Rishonim, and Tosafot seems to say this, it's not when they meted out the case already, because he doesn't like that approach so much that Rashi says, but rather, meaning when they've already gone through the facts. Rashi in Tosafot at the beginning says, Kvar dikteku bedin hetiv, ukemo gamru et hadin, de lo michser ela ish ploni ata chayav. Meaning they haven't meted it out yet, but they've come to some sort of a conclusion in their own minds. So there the Gemara is saying, at that point it wouldn't be appropriate for them to arbiter, to create some sort of a compromise, when they've already concluded what the right outcome would be based on din, based on the psak of the Torah. That's going to be how Tosafot learns. But again, Rashi learns it means once they've meted out judgment, they're not able to create a compromise, as Tosafot is explaining, to pretend at least, maybe we're making a mistake, so let's make a arbitration, that they're not allowed to do. They have to meet it out as they have concluded and have told them is Chayav and Zakai. Now we're going to stop here at the top of Vav Amud Bet. But actually, as we'll continue tomorrow with Vav Amud Bet, the Gemara is going to go through explaining, is arbitration even considered something virtuous? Is it something that's problematic? This general idea about pshara, making this kind of a compromise. That Hashem will pick up tomorrow from Vav Amud Bet, the top line of the page. Everyone have a wonderful day.